Welcome to Behind the Fang, the Progeny Vampire podcast, a podcast by, for, and about the members of the vampire community in Second Life. This is the voice of the source, Lachiel. Today, I had the pleasure to speak to Infernal's Lazar and Machiavelli. Let's get started. All right, welcome to the podcast. Today I have the pleasure to speak with the Infernals, Lazar and Machiavelli. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Source.
Well, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you guys for quite some time. And as I recall, we've done this once before when I first started the podcast, but the audio quality turned out terrible.
That wasn't with Lazar. That was actually with somebody else. Lucifer.
Yeah, I was driving that day, so I couldn't stop and make the call.
Well, I recall. Well, this time, the last time I did an episode was rather a quick chat with myself. This time, I want to get back to my normal format. However, I would like to do something rather special this time in the Synthesis of Mythology section, because I have some important issues I've been thinking about that I would like to talk with you guys about as sort of a sounding board. But first, let's start off with the interview questions. Lazar, why don't you tell us, how did you get involved in Progeny?
I was seduced into Progeny. I was brought in. I had a friend that I was dating, and at first I didn't want any parts of it. Being an ex-Bloodlines player, I had no desire to join another vampire system. But then she talked me into it, and I started to enjoy it. And at first it was just because she was doing it. Then I got into the political side, and I started watching what was going on there, and haven't looked back since.
Mark, why don't you tell us, how did you get involved in Progeny?
I actually was brought in. It was talked about openly on a couple friends, Doc Clarington and Little Eva Flux, and it sounded interesting because I got disillusioned with Bloodlines because, in my opinion, it's more of a pyramid scheme. It doesn't fit the traditional, because a vampire should not be able to turn a Lycan, or a human should not be able to turn a vampire or any immortal species. And it became interesting.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. In my original design, I wanted to stick with what was, traditional in vampire novels, books, movies, and stories. Lazar, what was your most memorable thing to happen to you while you're in Progeny?
I don't know about my most favorite thing that happened to me in Progeny was probably when I was in trouble and I had my lips sewn shut.
I remember that.
I enjoyed that little bit of role play.
Yeah. Actually, on that topic, I can remember exactly when that happened, and there was a lot of controversy about you at that time that came to my attention, and your willingness to accept the roleplay based punishment for what you did cemented in my mind the type of player you were, and that no matter what your reputation, you were in it for the benefit of the system. So I really appreciated that, and I think that's how you and I became friends.
Correct. Yeah, we had a long discussion about it, and I heard your idea about what you wanted to do with the punishment, and I thought it was a great idea and wanted to go for it, and we did, and it turned out really well.
All right, and Mach, what would you say is your favorite moment in Progeny?
When I came back after going through chemo for a while, and I was asked back by Diabolical Lord Oberon, and I came back under Demi, and then my line came back and had the third rogue house, because that turned out to be an interesting roleplay scenario, because it was very interesting, because I got into little arguments with even Lazar and other people, and I could do it, but it was in roleplay, and then it was just a unique experience entirely, from where being a house leader within a clan to actually being a rogue house leader.
Yeah, very Very, very cool. You guys have both had long and interesting careers in the progeny community. Mock, you left for a while and then came back. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What was this due to health reasons, or did you just get tired of the system?
No, actually, it was a lot to do with what I was going through in real life with leukemia and having go through radiation and chemotherapy, and then also having the drama. There was a lot of drama going on, and it got to the point where I couldn't even think straight.
Yeah,
I remember.
I can certainly understand that, and we all, in Progeny, wish you well with your health. We know what you've been through, and we're happy to still have you with us. So, looking forward to your finishing up your treatments and getting all nice and stabilized. It's very good news. Why don't you both tell us a little bit about your roles in Progeny currently, your clans, houses, bloodlines, your roles on the diabolic councils, things like that. Lazar, why don't you go first?
Okay. My role is multifaceted. I'm a clan leader, sovereign. So I supervise everybody that's under me. I have 5 houses currently that sit under the clan. I'm also the devil's advocate, lead devil's advocate. That's an interesting role that you created after a discussion that we had about when people get in trouble and they needed a way to have a voice in their defense.
Yep. Actually, the original idea was yours. I just gave it a name.
Okay. And then also I'm an infernal to Diabolic Lino.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that role, mainly because we've become really good friends since I've known him. And anytime he needs anything done, I do whatever I can to facilitate that.
Yeah, well, Leno and Tasha are both outstanding. I am so pleased to have met them. They've been such a huge help to me, and they came along right at a time when I needed somebody to be there. So those guys are awesome, and you guys have got hooked up with the right ones. I'll give you that.
Yeah,
why don't you tell us a little bit about your roles in Progeny, and then we can move on to mythology synthesis.
I actually have not as many roles as Lazar, as I'm not a clan leader yet, but I'm a house leader within our Raven's Claw clan, but I'm on the bloodline of Societas Draconostarum under Arch Nestus. However, I became part of the marshal's office because I've seen a lot of the people cheat. There's not really cheating, but it's creating an unfair advantage. Mm-hmm. And I've always been more about the sportsmanship, and that's why when I heard about the marshals from Zach, whose idea it was, I thought it would be an interesting way to help the community. And then also knowing Diabolical Lord Moy, as long as I've known him since he was a regular vampire within RC. Always been fighting with him on the same side and everything else. So I enjoy being his Infernal because it's almost like a brother relationship, even though he's in Spain and I'm in the U.S. But I'm glad he's back.
Yeah, I am very glad he's back. We've missed having a Spanish Diabolic around, and Moy has really proven himself, his loyalty to the system and his devotion to the community over and over again. And I wasn't really sure what was going on with him. I knew he was ill, but I hadn't really heard from him for a long time. So I've been asking about him for the last several weeks, just to try to get an update, as to whether or not he was coming back. And then suddenly he reappears. Quite thrilled.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Okay, I want to, not to cut this conversation part of it short, but I actually have 3 topics I want to discuss in the mythology. I can't even talk. In the mythology synthesis section, I like to talk about, the development of the system, the development of the community, our shared history, all that sort of thing, Today, I want to talk about some things that I normally would speak to the Diabolics and or the Archvampires about, but I want to share these ideas with the system in general through the podcast. And you two are actually pretty close advisors in my circle of friends, so I think you might be very good sounding boards for these ideas. I have already spoken with the Diabolics about most of this, and to some extent the Archvampires. So it's not like I'm jumping over anybody's head or leaving anybody out. And none of this is set in stone. But I do want to share with the community the kind of conversations that we have behind the scenes. This section may be a little longer than normal, so we may not get to some of the other sections I normally do, such as Fireside Chat, Crystal Ball, and Whispers in the Dark. So let's get started here. The first section I want to talk about is subsistence. Have you guys run into any issues with younger vampires having odd subsistences as compared to older vampires?
I have in some ways, because I've noticed like some people that are been cited after me, especially more recently, are having lower subsistence than I even started with, even as a Gen 4. Mm-hmm. When I first started, mine was 0.470, and now where I am now, even with my breaks, I'm at 2.90. Some of them are actually starting off with 0.310 substance levels.
Lazar?
I haven't noticed any difference. I mean, the fledglings come in, they have a greater subsistence than I do, being an older vampire, but that's the only thing I've noticed.
Well, recently, in the last several months, I've fielded a lot of complaints and issues about younger vampires, in some cases, having much lower subsistence rating than much older vampires. Now, the subsistence system was originally designed to sort of emulate the vampire Lestat concept that an older vampire who embraces a new vampire creates a stronger vampire. I created the subsistence system to give a portion of the sire's subsistence bonus that they've accrued through age to their progeny. So if you are an older, lower generation vampire and you create a new fledgling, they start off with some portion of the subsistence that you've accrued. This has caused, in the beginning of the system, it worked great. But now it's causing horrible skews in the subsistence rankings of quite a few, especially when older, lower generation vampires keep embracing new vampires. So I came up with an idea of how to deal with this. And the best solution that I've come up with is to simply level the playing field. Do away with the current subsistence system that causes vampires to lose a very tiny amount of subsistence every night that they are undead, and instead base subsistence on the age groups, so that fledglings all have the same subsistence, old all have the same subsistence, ancient all have the same subsistence, and leviathans all have the same subsistence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Do you think that would be fair? Do you think I'll run into any kind of backlash from some people? Might actually go up in subsistence, others may go down.
I don't think you should run into any. I mean, it seems like it's a logical step. I mean, as you're coming in as a fledgling, in my mind at least, you would need to feed more than, say, myself, who's ancient.
Right. So I agree. I think this is the best solution. Now, there are some complications. I need to then deal with subsistence temporary bonuses and penalties, such as if you use a vampire restoration draft, instead of actually permanently changing your subsistence, I might need to create a bigger effect, but make it last only for a specific amount of time, say a week or a month. So with
that, you could actually do it even easier than that, is have it downgraded over time the longer they're alive. Yeah. Just like you could actually use this like this subsistence
Oh,
framework that you have.
Yeah, the current formula. That makes sense. So if you take a negative hit due to a draft or something, then that would be decremented over time by the current formula, but base subsistence would be built on the age group. That's actually a pretty good idea, and that would integrate existing framework. It would cause no additional coding to need to be done. Great. Okay, now the next, that's pretty much it on that particular topic. Is I think that the subsistence system needs to be fixed. It seems like you guys are in agreement with me on that. The next concept is a rather serious one, and probably needs much more discussion. What do you guys feel about masquerade breaches?
That's like the worst thing you could do. Absolutely, because it causes so much drama, especially when it's to a non-progeny player, a human walking around out there, because they have no idea that we're feeding off them, and the HUD's really not doing anything anyway. It's our feeding's based off the HUD, so it doesn't affect that human player out in the SL community. But once they become aware of the fact that someone's been feeding off them, they feel violated. Yes. And that's natural. But it causes so much drama, and it's definitely a detriment to the entire system.
Another way you could look at it, and it might increase the roleplay factor, is that if a masquerade breach has occurred and can be proven, maybe go back to what because Lazar, wasn't it your masquerade breach at Bloodlines that caused your mouth to be shown shut?
It wasn't Bloodlines. It was during an attack, and it was an accidental breach. I was trying to IM another attacker that was coming in to make a kill, and I hit local instead of their IM and called off the attack. Called my diabolic right then and there and said I screwed up, and told her exactly what happened. And when I talked to the source, I explained everything that happened to him and told him I was willing to be slain and face whatever punishment needed to happen. Because I do think it's that much of an egregious act. I mean, even on an accidental basis, something has to happen to you.
I agree. And we came up with a pretty amicable solution at the time. Now, okay, I can't do anything about every type of masquerade breach, at least not yet. But the one that vexes me the most is when a progeny vampire outs another vampire to a non-player. You know, hey, you got bitten by so-and-so, or you're dead. You were killed by a progeny player. And like you said, that just makes them feel violated and gives the system a bad name. So I have come up with an idea, and I want to run this by you guys. And the idea is I will go and restore 20% of all shades that are out there, bring them back to life randomly. And then I will randomly slay 20 to 25% of all humans. And then anytime you meet a new human or a new avatar that has not been scanned by the system previously, there would be a 20% chance that this avatar will instance as a shade, dead. So there would be no way to really judge whether any given avatar was killed by a vampire or was killed by just the system in general.
And
that is unique.
You're hoping that will alleviate some jerk sitting there telling a human that they've been violated.
To some extent, yeah, because you wouldn't be able to tell who did it. I mean, unless of course you knew for sure, you scanned them, they were quick, and then so and so walked up and bit them, and then you scanned them again and they're dead. But that doesn't happen very often. I think at the very least, when Jane Smith comes to me and says, hey, I'm not in your system, but I've been killed by one of your vampires, I can say, maybe not. You know, you are a non-player, and when the system scanned you, it may have just instanced you as dead. So there's no way to tell, even for me, there's no way to tell if you were killed by a player or if you're just, dead in the system randomly. So
there's another option.
Yes.
And that's on a few of the other like gaming systems that are kill or be killed systems, and it's randomly built in that you can only drain them to a certain point, and they automatically regenerate. Maybe we should not having shades and quicks, maybe because that way nobody could really know anyway.
Well, I think a fundamental part of the system is the quick and the dead thing. I like that, and I don't want to change it. And I don't think it really would matter to them, or it might even matter more if they're constantly able to be a food source. A question I got today is, hey, is there any way that I can prevent myself from being fed upon by Progeny Vampires? I'm like, well, if the person told you that you're already dead, then you can't be fed on by Progeny Vampires anymore. You're done. I mean, there's nothing more. You don't need to opt out because you're already opted out.
Right.
Will that stop somebody from coming up and talking to you? No, but that's what the block button's for.
Right. I see exactly what you're doing with that.
I think it would be cool, because then you could also say with a random chance you scan someone and all of a sudden they're not scanned in the system, and you bite them, and then all of a sudden they're shaded. You're like, wait a second. It leaves more of an air of mystery too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whenever they are first encountered by the system, which would be when you scan them or when you bite them, if you're the kind of person that bites first and asks questions later, that is when they're instanced, and that is when they would either be alive or dead. Which would give more risk to biting people without scanning them, because you could potentially get some dead man's blood that way.
Right.
Okay, there is a slight problem to this, is that I do want the system to continue to be free, and if people randomly start out as dead, they would need a revival to join the system at some point. So what I could probably do is create some sort of one-time free restoration kiosk that they could come to, touch it, and be restored. But each human can only be restored one time for free.
Yeah,
that would make sense.
That would just work off their UID, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything works off the UUID. I don't track any information about avatars that are not in the system.
Right.
The UUID is actually used as a key to encode the information. So unless I have that UUID, I can't even look up their status. I mean, if someone were to send me a Skype message and say, hey, blah, 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 if I don't have the UUID, I can't tell anything about the particular avatar.
Right.
Even if they give me their username or what have you, I just don't have it. Okay, so what do you guys think about the idea in general?
I like it. I think it gives...
I really do like it too, as well, because it gives a little more air of mystery behind it too.
I think it gives the system, as far as dealing with the public, it gives us an out.
Yep.
Because you're now telling Jane Doe that, well, maybe you weren't fed off. Maybe it was just a random selection, and like a lottery draw. Yep. Your number just happened to come up, and that's why you're dead. Doesn't necessarily mean you were actually killed by someone.
Exactly.
The computer generated it.
And
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, there's no way to tell one way or the other unless you join the system.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
I mean, it's still not going to stop.
No, it won't
the
stop.
The problem of
it might
Progeny players outing other Progeny players just to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Or Progeny players going and telling their friends, yeah, so-and-so Mock flew over to our land today and killed you. And that's the stuff that drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That they do. That type of violation, I think, is the most serious violation. And those types, when they happen, should be slain.
Yeah, I agree. And if we can prove that somebody outed another somebody to a non-player, that's generally a permanent ban from the system. The last element I want to talk about that is really important, and I really would like some feedback from you guys on this, in the way of ideas, is dusting and undusting. Currently, I have a suspended system that dusts a vampire that is deep slain level 2, meaning they have been slain, come back to a coma, gone back to slain, gone back to a coma 2 times. This removes them from the system but backs up all their information and then resires anybody under them up to whoever their sire was. It's called an orphan resire. It seals the blood chain. It just removes them from the system, and it basically makes the system go faster and takes potency weight off of people. But I ran into an issue where people say, hey, I had, so-and-so, we wanted to preserve my father for historical reasons. I didn't want him gone, per se. They want to preserve them. So I need to talk about how to accomplish that. And more importantly, I need to talk about how do we undust somebody. Somebody has been dusted, they've been gone for 2 years, but now they want to come back into the system and they want to keep their age. They want to keep their age and any potency they have accrued and things like that. The easy solution is I simply resurrect them and they start over. But that should be the free version. What should be the cost involved, either in linden, blood potency, or blood, or all of the above, for a restoration of your account being resired to a new sire?
How much of an issue is it on the back end?
Well, to simply resurrect them and let them start over requires nothing on my part at the moment other than maybe making a kiosk. That would be
right.
Very easy to do. To do a restoration will require some coding, but I can pretty much reuse the resire code as it exists. I just may need to make some minor changes to that. Either way, it's not that major of a programming task, but it does need to be automated because it's a massively complex system, and to simply restore somebody through manual SQL queries, there's just too much risk of damaging data. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Well, there's a way of doing it, and I was thinking about it when Laz was talking about it. You could almost, for like a dusted vampire, you could almost have it using the revival altar, adding an extra, I don't know how much it would be on the coding, but the donor vampire would have to sacrifice some of their blood to reanimate that vampire.
That's a good idea. Okay, let's talk about that from a roleplay perspective, because really that's both of your value to me in this conversation. Is you roleplay, you both spend time in active role plays in the system. So how would you see it? Okay, here we have a vampire that is disintegrated into dust. You have an urn full of their dust, and you want to restore them to a full vampire, bonding them to a new sire. How do you see that happening?
Well, I just seen that actually Dracula, the latest movie that I just watched.
Dracula Untold?
Yeah, they just had that. He sliced his wrist, didn't he, and drained the blood into the ashes, and that started to revive him and bring him back.
Yep. I once saw. Go ahead.
Or you could even go back to, if you go to even in another movie with Underworld, how they revived the hibernating vampires is they were really dead in a corpus state, but they actually they had to give them blood to revive them
down to the floor. I actually wanted to build that as a embracing room.
How about this for an idea? Because I once saw an old vampire movie too, where Dracula's ashes were poured into an open sarcophagus. They hung a human upside down by a meat hook, slit his throat, and let the blood drain into the coffin, and that restored Dracula into his corporeal form. Maybe we could set something up to where a dusted vampire requires so much in the way of lindens or potency to to restore by, say, one given resire, one given sire. And I'm just thinking out loud here. So let's say I am a vampire and I am older than you and you are a dusted vampire. Or I am older than you were when you became dusted. And I want to restore you. It may have a very high potency cost for me to restore you because we're nearly the same age and I'm trying to pull you back from dust. But if I pull together 4 or 5 of my friends and each of them pour in, say, 3 or 4 liters of blood, it reduces the potency cost by percentages based on how many people participate in the ritual.
I think that'd be pretty cool because, you're on the same concept that we were talking about, the blood. It definitely needs blood to come back.
Yeah, and I think at a very minimum it should require like 1 point of potency and 4 liters of blood from the new sire because there has to be a rebonding and a reagent to make that bond stick. The same as in a sort of a resire situation. But adding more people to the ritual to reduce the cost by adding more blood and more participation, I really like that idea. But make it optional.
Like that too.
You can almost even add it in the roleplay. They're dusted, and then all of a sudden the blood combining of a regular vampire recorporalizes their body.
So how hard would it be to, let's say if we're using the revival altar, how hard would it be to script it so that the dusted vampire lays down on it, then the vampires that are bringing them back to life would then, each person would touch it, and then the machine would calculate how much blood to take from each person?
It would require a reworking, but I think the revival altars need to be reworked anyway. There's still some bug in them that causes it to periodically lock up, and I have no idea what's causing that aside from the fact that it's a web call that doesn't get a response, and then it sits waiting for that response indefinitely. So I need to rework those anyway, and it might be a good idea to go ahead and throw that into the revival altar. It does seem like it belongs there, and it shouldn't be that difficult to add that feature. We are running up on half an hour here, so I think I'm going to bring this conversation to a close. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with me tonight, especially on these important topics.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Yep.
My pleasure too.
Well, Lazar and Mac, I really appreciate this. It's been fun. And I will have you guys back on the show here in the very near future because there's a lot more I would like to talk with you guys about. But, I really wanted to get an episode out tonight because it's been so long since I've done a regular episode. All right, gentlemen. Everybody.
All right, thank you.
Everybody have a great night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
You too.